All right, thank you so much for joining the class. I have five people on board, and today we are going to be looking at, in today's class, we are going to be looking at Introduction to Educational Finance. Basically, educational finance is one of the aspects of educational administration. However, when you are administering, you administer both human and material resources. One of the vital or most important material resources is finance. So in education, educational finance is also vital and important because without finance, most of the time, educational organizations will not have the adequate resources to manage or administer educational activity. So what is educational finance? Educational finance refers to the process of generating, allocating, managing, and utilizing financial resources for the provision of educational services. So if you look at it, it says it's a process. So when you say educational finance, the process of not just managing alone, it starts with generating finance, allocating the finance, managing the finance, utilizing the finance. When you then utilize it appropriately to provide educational service or to provide education, then that is educational finance. It does trying to let us know that you have to look at how you are going to raise fund, how you are going to distribute it, as well as how you going to be accountable for using it effectively to achieve educational goals. As such, educational finance is trying to look at the effective and efficient generation, allocation, managing and utilization of educational resources. As we all know, that education is building human capital. And one thing is certain, when we say you are investing in education, you are investing in capital, human capital development. And this has direct implication for also national development. As such, the need for financing is so much vital. In education, when we talk about finance, educational finance covers how do you fund your schools, whether primary school, whether secondary school, whether tertiary institution, as well as colleges and university. So this scope of educational finance also covers how do you budget and how do you do budgeting and expenditure control in all the various level of education, whether at the primary, secondary or tertiary level, or college or university as the case may be. This educational finance also covers areas that has to do with how do you do your resource allocation among education as a budget, as a form of budgeting, whether as an individual, whether as a corporate organization or as government. This educational finance also covers cost benefit analysis, financial planning, as well as financial management and accountability. So these are the scopes in which educational finance covers. If you look at the definition that we gave, it starts with generating. So it implies that when we talk about educational finance, we should look at educational finance. How do you generate funds? How do you allocate it? How do you manage it? As well as how do you utilize those funds to provide education at every level? And as such, because you are trying to look at how do you manage it, how do you generate fund, and how do you utilize it, you are going to also be concerned about budgeting, expenditure, resource allocation, financial planning, and so on and so forth. All these are also in line with what? In line with the scope at which educational finance covers. So basically, if you look at the meaning, from the meaning of educational finance, we can easily look at some of the objectives of educational finance. As such, whether you are whether your education system is a public education or private education system, This education finance serve the following objectives: it ensure adequate funding for education, just because you are going to be concerned about how do you generate it, how do you allocate it, how do you manage it, how do you utilize it. So one of the main objective is to ensure adequate funding for education or educational activity, as well as education sector of a country. It also help to promote equitable distribution of educational resources, just because after generation you have to do what we call resource allocation. You be able to distribute educational resources equitably, efficiently and effectively. It also allow you to do what we call efficient and effective use of fund. That has to do with the utilization aspect. And it's educational access, quality and relevance. So with educational finance, countries that fund education will have more of quality education compared to country that do not fund education. It will also promote access to education among nations where funds allocated, generated and utilized for educational purpose. And similarly, one of the objectives is to ensure accountability and transparency in financial management of educational activities. So these are the objectives of educational finance. It starts from allowing or ensuring adequate funding through equitable distribution, effective and efficient use, ensuring quality access, as well as accountability and transparency. What are now the sources of educational finance? Basically, when we talk about sources of educational finance, we are going to look at it from various sources. One of the most important source is government sources. So in a country, governments are meant to fund education, whether at the federal level, whether at the state level, whether at the local government level. And specifically, if government funds this education, they will provide finance directly, they will allocate finance directly, and as such those funds will be used for educational purpose. And among other thing is that we have what we call educational tax and levies collected, which is one of the internal how government generates revenue, such that those revenues are now used for educational purposes. Similarly, government also do some intervention funds in form of educational grants or loan. In Nigeria, for example, we have NEL fund, which is which is saddled with providing finance for students so that they can also go to school. That is trying to do what we call support educational endeavour of students. We also have TET fund, which is concerned about tertiary education fund, where they provide fund for institution to cater for other things that they cannot cater independently from their own revenue. All these are government sources. Apart from that, we also have private sources, because the in order to generate funds for education, government alone cannot do it. So these private sources, most of the time, whether it is a public school or a private school, they charge tuition, and tuition are also one of the private sources from those that will benefit from education. They also charge school fees in some instances. All these are private sources. For every institution, they can always receive donation as well as endowments. These donations and endowments may be from philanthropies, from alumni, from people that are in the society that value education. They can give those endowments as a form of support, and this will serve as private sources of educational finance where they can generate revenue with organizations who are philanthropic in nature. They can provide direct funding for educational endeavours across all level of education. Another source is external sources. So if I say external sources, it implies that apart from the government of the country, international organizations concerned about education such as UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, USA, all these can provide external sources in form of grants to the country to fund education, or to directly to the institution or educational institutions, as the case may be. In that case, there can also be grants from donor agency, as well as loans internationally outside the territory of the country. This will serve as what? This will serve as external sources. So moreover, we have talked about sources. We have looked at government sources, we have looked at private sources, as well as we have looked at external sources. Educational finance, just like I have said, one of the scope is trying to look for budgeting and expenditure control. Another thing one has to take care of when you are doing educational finance is your expenditure. Just because we looked at it from the point of generating, allocating and managing and utilizing. So when you now look at allocating, you have to control your expenditure. In education, we have capital expenditure, we have recurrent expenditure. Capital expenditure are long term investments. When you build schools, when you buy furnitures, you equip the library, you equip the laboratories, all these are capital expenditures, and as such they will stay for a long time. In fact, recurrent expenditures are regular expenses incurred in running the school. That's day to day activity of the schools. You have to pay salaries for your staff, allowances, you have to buy teaching and learning materials, you have to maintain your utilities, electricity, power supply, internet. All these ones are recurrent expenditure. So in your educational finance, one has to consider this type of expenditure. Just like I have said, we are looking at expenditure and budgeting. And in educational finance, we also have budgeting, which is the process of esti- estimating the cost, well, the income and expenditure within a given period of time, whether as a country, whether as an individual, whether as a private organization. In order to manage your finance, you need budgeting. And this budgeting can be a long term budget, can be a time of, in terms of program budget. Probably you want to do a particular program, you just do budget for that. A kind of line item budget, probably you want to be able to cater for certain needs, and you want to know what will be the cost, how will you generate income for it, what is going to be the expenses, is it going to be a balanced budget, a surplus budget or a deficit budget. It can be that you want to do what we call performance based budget. Based on what you have been doing over time, you are now using it to plan ahead. All this budgeting, trying to estimate income and expenditure, can help you in your planning, in coordination as well as control of educational resources. I As I have said, budgeting is very important, just because it helps you to plan, coordinate and control it. One important thing is, if you look at your expenditure and you look at your income, how you generate sources, whether from government, whether from private or whether from external, you will then look at the needs of educational institution, do your planning, coordination and control of education, that somebody must have secured in providing policy direct costs as well as costs. And is one of those things that we have to look, and that has to do with how do you plan and transparency. In financial management, they do what we call financial accounting. One one vital term is inadequate fund. When there is, there's also mismanagement, operation, corruption, and the cost of education is increasingly such that government alone cannot. We also have what we call dependence on government. When you develop government, you will not be able to overcome this problem. The following strategies: government should increase funding. In fact, in line with recommendation, every of a country should have budget 26% of their budget. Then there's also funding sources. Such government sources educational financing that the education system finance the source, as well as various other components of educational. So if you look at the review being displayed, I want you to add boss to those. So I will answers to those questions while I wait